We are at 1 minute past the hour. And again, if you just joined us, if you would like, please introduce yourself via the chat. We're so happy that you're here. You're in for a treat. I'm Diane Dersch, and I'm the chair of COSN, the Consortium for School Networking. And today's a really special day because we all get to have a chat with Michael Klein. And he is the Digital Infrastructure Impact Fellow. And so Michael has served as Digital Infrastructure Impact Fellow within the Department of Education's Office of Educational Technology. With 15 years in K-12 education as a teacher, a coach, and a consultant, and a district leader, Michael is leading OET's development of the new Digital Infrastructure Guide, focusing on cybersecurity, data privacy, interoperability, and accessibility. Prior to joining OET, Michael was an IT director for a school district during COVID-19. With the support of an amazing leadership team and IT staff, he ensured the district's 2,500 students and 550 staff navigated in-person, hybrid, and remote learning safely and securely. Before moving into district leadership, Michael supported a team of 12 educational consultants leading transformational change in districts across the Northeast. Michael began his career teaching elementary school in Brooklyn and Harlem and was a founding teacher at High Tech High School just south of San Diego. Michael holds a BA in history from Vassar College and MED in childhood education from Bank Street College. I am so happy to have Michael here. And Michael, I want to hand it over to you. We are so happy you're here.
Thanks so much, Diane. And it's amazing to be here. I have such a profound love for COSN. And yeah, it's always wonderful to get to be with the people who are doing the work every single day. And so thank you so much for having me. I'm going to make sure that we dive right in. We'd love for you to add any questions that you have in the chat. We'll take lots of time for questions kind of throughout and at the end. Diane is going to jump in and give us some amazing color commentary based on her incredible experience throughout. And we're really going to lift up K-12 cybersecurity today because we all know that that's a hugely important topic. So just to dive right in, and this won't be new to you, right? Why should we be concerned about K-12 cybersecurity? We'll keep this part brief because you all live this every day. But when I talk with people, I usually try to highlight a few different types of incidents. Obviously, we've all seen the amazing K-12-6 cyber incident map, which gets updated. And we know that there have been at least 1,619 K-12 cyber incidents between 2016 and the end of 2022. Some of the most noteworthy that we've been talking about in the space have been the ransomware attack on LA Unified School District. Was lucky enough to get to meet Superintendent Carvalho just a few weeks ago now, and he really gave a masterclass on how to respond to this. So it hits our districts that are most highly resourced and most ready for these kinds of attacks. They were able to stop the attack from shutting down the school district, but still some data was exfiltrated that included student and teacher data. And so those challenges arise, right? We've also had school districts that have had to shut down operations, like Des Moines Public Schools, which had to shut down for multiple days this year and then extend their school year because of a ransomware attack. We also have some districts that have run into the challenge of, do I pay the ransom or not? How do we address these pieces? And then this is just to give you a sense for the emails that we get. This is me sending an email to a bunch of my colleagues from alerts that we got from CISA, when in the same day we got 7 alerts that districts had shown up on a breach forum and sensitive student data was being shared from there. And it's not just educators that are aware of this, not just IT directors. This is obviously making front page news. And so we know that this is a huge topic and it's something that we all want to address. And so we're going to talk about how best to do that. I want to give you a sense for what the Department of Education's role is in P20 cybersecurity. So not just K-12, but from pre-K all the way through college. So we have these growing cybersecurity risks in K-12 and higher education institutions. Just this March, the White House put out their national cybersecurity strategy, which I'll touch on a little bit because our work really grows out of that. think the most important thing from there to highlight is the desire to lift and shift the burden from small school districts and individuals up to those that can actually bear the challenge of K-12 cybersecurity broadly. So thinking about federal government, state government, and vendors that we know make up so much of our critical digital infrastructure. And then we have a lot of folks focusing on K-12 cybersecurity and specifically critical infrastructure. We have our friends at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, the Office of National Cyber Director, National Security Council, Office of Management and Budget, and the Government Accountability Office. It wouldn't be a federal webinar if you didn't hear 55 different acronyms, but I promise not to get too deeply into them. And I think most importantly, in support of President Biden's agenda, we're thinking about a once in a generation opportunity to really grow the defensibility and resilience of our nation's digital infrastructure, especially around K-12. And so when I talk about defensibility and resilience, I think it's important to talk about what we mean here. So here, there are kind of two main pieces of the strategy. One was rebalancing that responsibility to defend cyberspace, which we talked about, not just pushing this down onto our small school districts. We know that we have 2,500 students or fewer in 70% of our school districts, very small IT staff. And I know that that was certainly a challenge for me in my district. And we want to make sure that we're actually addressing the real problems people face. And the other piece is realigning incentives. How can we work with both the vendor community and with our leadership to make sure that we're investing in reducing risk over time and making those really impactful investments so that when there are breaches or when there are cyber incidents, they're not too impactful or widespread. And so what does this look like for us? We talk about education is critical infrastructure. And I think this quote from Acting National Cyber Director Kemba Walden really captured it for me. She said, "We expect school districts to go toe-to-toe with transnational criminal organizations largely by themselves. This isn't just unfair, it's ineffective. The biggest and most capable and best positioned actors in our digital ecosystem can and should shoulder a greater share of the burden for managing cyber risk and keeping us all safe." And that includes the federal government. So for me, that's really a statement of purpose and a statement of support for those in the field like I used to be and like you all are. We want to make sure we're showing up to actually defend and support the work that you're doing every day. I'm going to skip this next slide because it really just talks about how we're so good at taking down ransomware actors. You probably just saw just a couple of days ago, took down the largest botnet in the world that have been causing, I think, up to 30% of the ransomware attacks in the world. FBI did an incredible job with that across several different countries and just doing some incredible work there. But we still obviously have more work to do. So steps we're taking now, what are we doing at Ed? In the short term, we're elevating the importance of cybersecurity, both in our department and across when we talk with any state leaders, education service agency leaders, school district leaders. We're really making this a priority, and I can show you in a minute what that looks like. We're establishing a government coordinating council. That sounds really technocratic, but it's actually really important. It actually signals to everybody that we are critical infrastructure in education, and we need to be able to support our local and state governments and make sure that they're all having a chance to share with us what their challenges are and really impact the work that we're doing. And then to actually provide support and guidance to our states and districts. Sorry, I didn't click through that. Okay, so how are we elevating the importance of K-12 cyber? And then I'm going to let Diane do a little bit of talking about this too. So I was lucky enough to be able to bring together 200 education leaders and government leaders with Dr. Jill Biden, Secretary Cardona, and Secretary Mayorkas from DHS to really focus on K-12 cybersecurity just a couple weeks ago. And the focus there was really, this is a whole of government effort. This is something that we're all engaging in together. And it was just really touching to hear Dr. Biden talking about the big challenges that we're facing and also her experience as an educator. And to have an educator in the White House being able to speak to the challenges around cybersecurity that she's also faced. And then we had a panel with the superintendent of LA Unified School District, Carvalho, as well as the folks who were in the Situation Room actually addressing this challenge. So our deputy superintendent, or sorry, our deputy secretary, Cindy Martin, who was there really helping to make sure that we got boots on the ground to support when they had that ransomware attack, as well as Jen Easterly, the director of CISA, and Paul Abbott, the deputy director of the FBI. And then we talked about the commitments that we're making, like the GCC. CISA talked about how they're going to be doing 300 engagements with K-12 entities to make sure that they're getting the support that they need around assessments and things like that. And then also how the FCC is stepping forward to make some new commitments to try to bring cybersecurity funding to some of the programs that support our internet. And then finally, vendors also taking some important actions as well. And the picture that's not here are the people who I'm going to be highlighting throughout that are the great examples from our state agencies and our regional agencies, as well as our local agencies that are doing great work here. So I'm going to pause here for a second and say, Diane, what was your experience with this? And I don't know, talk to us a little bit about cybersecurity at the White House.
Sure. Well, and Michael, thank you and your whole team for the organization of this. This was really cool. And I had heard that this was going on, but imagine my surprise when I got an invitation from the White House to attend this. You know, for you, it's probably old hat going into the East Room and all those things. But for this farm kid from central Wisconsin to be able to travel to Washington, D.C. and take part in this was really something. You know, aside from the interesting things like going through security, seeing the White House on the other side of the gates, walking down the sunny hallway on the way to the East Room, hearing the Army band music playing in the hallways, seeing Dr. Jill Biden and you know, and the other secretaries was very, very cool. But I think what made the greatest impression on me was the fact that, you know, this is the first time that K-12 cybersecurity has been discussed at this high of a level. And to see so many different entities coming behind this, I think really made an impression on me. You know, our solution providers who are supporting our school districts, our governmental entities, K-12 and higher education, in the different organizations of leadership there. Those are all just really key things that are going to make this effort move forward. And the acknowledgement also that you don't have to be an LA Unified to, you know, get the help and support that you need. I come from rural Wisconsin, small school districts with, you know, under 1,000 students. How can we help pull in resources to protect them as well? And I was really hearing, you know, and hearing support from our solution providers, from our governmental entities to say, hey, we're here for you. And that just, you know, made my heart sing, really. But I know that we also, just because the stuff is there, we also have to use it. And so, you know, I'm looking forward to the next steps after this launch. But what a great opportunity to really bring to the forefront the issues of keeping our students safe in this digital world.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Diane. And yeah, it was definitely the first time I've ever been in the East Room. Also, an incredible experience there. And if you haven't gotten a chance to see it, please do check out the video, especially the comments from our secretary and deputy secretary. Just really powerful stuff. Okay. So I'm going to keep going, and please feel free to toss your questions in the chat or the Q&A function. I haven't been in Zoom in a while, so I'm sure we can get some really good conversation going there as well. I'll go really quickly through this last step and then get right into the document. So establishing a GCC, this is really a piece that's going to have to do with creating that coordination function between the Department of Education, our other federal partners like CISA and the FBI and the FCC, with our state, local, tribal, and territorial governments and our school districts. And this is really about how do we find out what the challenges are in the field? How do we share with district leaders what is coming up and the challenges that we're seeing, as well as getting feedback on any policies that we're starting to put together. And it's a really exciting opportunity to bring folks together on a regular basis. And so you'll be hearing more about this soon, but just wanted to mention that that's a big piece that we're working on. My personal favorite has been this document, the Defensible and Resilient K-12 Digital Infrastructure Brief. I got to work on this with our colleagues at CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, that do so much incredible work protecting our country's networks. And this was an opportunity to really lift up at the beginning of the school year, what are some of the big challenges we're facing, and what are some of the high impact actions that people can take? Because we know, like I mentioned, 70% of our school districts have 2,500 students or fewer, and very few resources for cybersecurity. We have amazing people on this call that are making every dollar work and are putting people to the incredible challenge that they face. And so really lifting up the things that people are doing that are great examples, and also some of the free resources that are available. So I wanted to give you the few key considerations to start off with. So those key considerations, we have continuous risk management, right? Like cybersecurity is a risk management problem. It's often treated as an IT problem. And what we're really trying to do is lift this up to the executive leadership level and say, this is actually something that superintendents need to be thinking about with their school boards and resourcing effectively. And they need to rely on the subject matter expertise of their IT directors, their CTOs, anybody else who's really helping with that. But this can't just live as a technical challenge, because this is a risk management challenge, much like financial risk. And so we need to think about it that way. We need to use analogies to help others understand the challenges that we're facing. One of the ones that I found most effective in the last year has been school fire safety, right? When we build our buildings, we build them so that hopefully there won't be any fires. We use special materials. We have more secure areas of the building. We make sure that they're accessible so people can get in and out who have all different kinds of disabilities. And we have, for when automated systems don't work, we have handles you can pull to say that there's a fire, right? We have all these different steps to take, and we practice them, right? We do drills. We make sure that everybody knows what their role is, and we practice that over and over and over again. So everyone knows when this incident happens, here's what you do. And so really making that transition from something where cyber feels like something that just the tech people deal with, or something that's very complicated, to something where everybody has a role, and we can help members of our community understand what their role looks like. And then prioritization and mitigation. Obviously, it is very hard to prioritize the millions of alerts that we have and all of the challenges that we face. What are the things that we can really step into to make the biggest impact, hopefully with the lightest lift? Some of the examples we'll talk about here in a little bit more, things that you are very familiar with that CISA and Ed recommend. So things like multi-factor authentication, enforcing minimum password strength, recognizing and reporting phishing attempts, and keeping software updated, right? Those are our 4 highest leverage things that we can be doing every day. But we'll talk a little bit more about specifics in just a minute. And then preparing for when, not if. This is that piece that we need to really identify that, if you haven't had an attack already, you likely have one coming soon, or you just haven't identified it yet. And we recommend developing and exercising cyber incident response plans. And we link to an example in the document, and I share one here as well. And also running tabletop exercises. Those are your cyber fire drills, right? So making sure like we know who to call and when, at which agencies, and when we tap the school board, and when we talk to the superintendent, and when we need to shut down schools. There are all these different pieces that are involved, right? And then finally, vendors have a key role to play. And for me, this is a really important piece that often gets left out. And while there are no laws right now requiring vendors to do specific things in the education space, it's an amazing thing that people have been working on, both on the privacy side and now also on the cybersecurity side, to help vendors step forward and take the initiative to make sure that they are securing our systems, because most districts are relying on those big vendors that we all know, right? Everybody is using 95% or more, probably using either Google or Microsoft for their email and file sharing and all those kinds of services. Making sure that those vendors are really stepping up, and they were represented at that event as well that we just had. So I'm going to pause there for a second and see if there's anything, Diane, that you want to comment on here. And I'm going to dive into some examples.
Yeah, I recall when I was Chief Technology and Information Officer over at Green Bay Area Public Schools. Summer is always so busy for your tech department. And I know, Michael, you know that because you've run departments before. And all of you in the audience are probably, you're getting to the end or have finished all your summer work. But I always did professional learning early summer because I knew the closer we got to school starting, that our technical staff would be busy. And we always spent time doing tabletop exercises. Again, just like you talk about, Michael, the fire drills, right? And we, in our department, had everyone from central registration, help desk, our network technicians, all together so that we could discuss internally, what is this going to look like? What are we going to do? What is the process here? Trying to build that muscle memory. So like you said, not if, but when it does happen, you know where your incident response center is. You know who's going to be the main communicator out. You know who's going to keep the superintendent involved in and communications as well as your attorney, right? Those are all things that you need to work out ahead of time so that when the real time comes, you can just, I don't want to say put on autopilot, but at least you're not trying to figure out all those roles and then also try to solve the problem. So those of you who are with us today, I'm sure those are things that you're probably doing as well. And, hopefully early summer, you were able to do that because it's showtime now, right? And so best of wishes to everyone as you start school. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's spot on. And thinking of the high impact recommendations that we can make. And I think it's worth pausing on this for a moment. When we think about the threat landscape, there are so many different kinds of threats, but the vast majority of people are gaining access, not through 0 days, not through really complex hacks, but through some very, very basic vulnerabilities that are being exploited. And the three that we see most commonly are compromising valid accounts, right? So you're stealing someone's credentials, maybe from a breach, or you're just guessing at what are default credentials or something like that, or weak passwords. We see folks who are, users that are getting phished by clicking on a malicious link or on an attachment, and then exploiting unpatched known vulnerabilities in public facing applications, right? This is like the enterprise level of upgrade your software, right? And these three things, if we can shut down access to these three vectors, you would shut down 80 to 90% of attacks that are hitting school districts. And that's not to say that it's easy to do. That's by no means am I saying we flip a switch and all these problems are solved, but these are solvable problems. It's a change management problem, right? We're managing risk. And this is something that takes time and it takes institutional buy-in, but these are things that we know how to solve for, right? It just takes that extra support to get there. And to actually get there, the four things that we've identified, which I've mentioned and we'll come back to more, but enabling multi-factor authentication, using strong, unique passwords for every account, recognizing and reporting phishing, and updating your software, right? Those are our four things. We try to frame cyber risk management around the NIST cybersecurity framework. We don't need to go super deep into it. We just like to keep those buckets there. And so we framed our resource around that as well. We need to be able to identify the risk, protect against it, detect it when it comes, respond, and then recover once we've had an incident. And that's kind of the wheel that we go through. And so I want to call out an example from each of these and also a resource that you can use right away from each of these. And then Diane, feel free to jump in anywhere here as well. The example I want to call out first is what North Dakota has been doing. Sorry, it's a lot of text, but I'll give you the high level of this one. North Dakota is the first state to have a central shared service approach to cybersecurity across all of its state government. And it also reaches down into K-12 education. And so that whole of state approach gave their chief information security officer, who we were lucky enough to meet at the White House a few weeks ago for North Dakota IT, kind of major ways to address some big challenges around identification of threats, right? So they have now a joint cybersecurity operations center that is not just for the state, but also now crosses 10 states and is reaching down into school districts to see when incidents are happening, how they can help respond to those incidents. And that's something that no individual district is likely to be able to do unless they're one of the biggest 100 in the country. And even some states don't have that capacity yet. So this is really standing up some smart work that's been happening there. They've also been pooling risk, right? So now they've been able to say, okay, if you adopt the shared service model, you actually end up with a reduction in your insurance rates because the insurance companies know that you're able to get the support that you need and that you're closing up those vulnerabilities. So this is going to hit the bottom line too. And so this will speak to your superintendents, to your chief finance officers, and the folks who are really thinking about that money side of things. And then also third-party risk assessment. And this is something that is really important because you as an individual IT director are likely not to have the time to be able to go through and understand every vendor and how much assurance they're giving you around how secure their networks are. But there are recognized credentials that people can get that allow them to say, you know, we are approved by FedRAMP or StateRAMP or HITRUST, or you have state entities now like North Dakota, they're actually going to require that third-party risk assessment as part of selling into the state or into school districts. And I know that that's hard for one individual to say, you know, if you're a small district, but if a state does that, it does bring a different level of heft to the conversation. And so I think that that's a really interesting example too. So that's kind of North Dakota's approach to this challenge. And while you as an individual can't necessarily do all of those things, what you can do is mitigate known exploited vulnerabilities, right? And this is something that you can do for free. As you know, cybersecurity threats can feel really overwhelming. We have limited time, staff, and funding. And so we at ED and CISA strongly recommend that people focus on identifying and mitigating what are called known exploited vulnerabilities, which is kind of a big phrase for basically the small subset of vulnerabilities that are actively being exploited in the wild and have clear remediation action. So these are not 0 days. These are things that bad actors are doing that we know are vulnerabilities, and there's a patch available, right? So this is an easy problem to solve for because you know the next step to take. And so one of the things you can do that makes this really easy is you can sign up for CISA's cyber hygiene vulnerability scanning process. And that scanning helps secure your internet-facing systems from weak configurations or vulnerabilities. And when you sign up for it, you also get enrolled in a weekly scan, and you get automatically enrolled in CISA's new ransomware vulnerability warning pilot. So if anything pops up that's an indicator of ransomware that they've seen from threat actors coming out of your district's network because they'll have your IP range, they will call you. And I've spoken to districts that have had this experience where CISA gets in touch and says, hey, we see something beaconing out from your school district, or we see a vulnerability within your district that we know is being exploited by X, Y, or Z ransomware actor. You probably want to patch that. That is exactly the kind of phone call that you want from the government to help you make sure that you are secure. And this is something that is completely free, and I'll make sure that you all have the link to it, and it's in our document as well. But that for me is the most important thing that if I were still in charge of a district that I would be doing, because you're letting CISA know, hey, we want this support, and we know that we could get, you can get some really actionable data from that. So I'm going to pause there and say that that's the kind of identify section. Diane, is there anything you want to add there or questions in the chat that we can toss in?
Well, I wanted to bring up North Dakota because that was a great example. One thing that I do believe they also did was make a commitment to teach all students K through 12 about cybersecurity. And I thought that was a great commitment as well, because again, as Michael said, it's not just the IT department's job, right? And so having our classroom teachers, having our superintendents, our boards of education, all supporting this is going to make a world of difference. Parents, and helping parents understand cyber threats. And so, you know, I do believe, I have a security friend who calls humans the wetware. And if we can get to the wetware and help them with this, you know, I'm interested in the data that will come through out of North Dakota in the coming years regarding are some of these incidents thwarted because our students have been learning about it since kindergarten. You know, that's a pretty remarkable thing. And as they go out into this digital world, this is a skill that they're going to need, and we wish more adults had that information. So I wanted to bring that up about North Dakota because I do believe they are pushing on a very effective lever that will make a difference. And so I'm interested for what the future brings for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be really interested to know if anyone wants to toss into the chat. Are any of your districts already signed up for the Sci-Hi program, that sign up cyber vulnerability scanning? Have you gotten any useful intelligence from that? What have your experiences been on the kind of identify side of the house, right? That like identification before the problems really blow up. It would be interesting to know. So I'm going to pause there for a second give people a minute to type, because I know if I keep talking, I'm going to talk over people actually thinking. I'm going to pause for a second. Don't ask me to sing though. Won't be good.
Well, I can say it sounds like a great resource. If I were in, a school district, Jill already had put the link in here, I would like be signing up right now, because you're right, it does send a good message also to CISA that, hey, we want to be involved. We want to be part of the solution. We'll work along with you to do that. And so look at, someone said they just sent them an email now. So we're doing
Awesome.
jobs here, Michael,
I
getting
love
people
it.
to sign up.
That's perfect. Cool. So I'll keep talking through our examples then, and please feel free to jump in anytime. So next example. So K-12-6 has put together their Essential Cyber Incident Response Runbook. And so this really speaks to knowing who's going to do what when, right? So helping K-12 leaders jumpstart those incident response plans. They put together kind of a runbook, which is a series of questions and kind of a document you can create that allows you to really start to think through concretely who's a part of our cyber incident response team and what do they do during an incident. Then you have different roles and who can be in those different roles. How do you declare a potential cyber incident and mobilize the IR team? That is not actually that easy to do. You have to think about what are the legal implications of that. Do you have to have had a conversation with a lawyer and your superintendent and your school board? There are a lot of pieces to this puzzle that I wasn't aware of when I was first getting started with this. Who are the key contacts internally and externally? Do you have relationships already with your FBI field office, with your CISA cybersecurity agent in the area, advisor? Do you have out-of-band communication channels? Because if someone's inside your network, you're not going to want to use your Teams chat or your Slack or your email because the threat actor can see it, or you might not have access to it. Do you have the cell phone numbers of the relevant people so you can make sure that you can get to them in that incident context? And then how do we alert executive leadership, legal counsel? Who do we call first, second, third? How do we notify people when the incident has occurred? I'd be really interested in the chat as I'm continuing to talk about this and the actions you can take. Does anyone have an incident response plan? Do you have any examples that you'd want to highlight for us? Are there people who you turn to in these contexts? So again, this work is really kind of cybersecurity as a team sport, right? It's something where we all come together to support each other because one of us can't do all of it, and we're as insecure as the weakest link in the chain. We have to make sure that everybody is really having that strong support. As an IT director in that instance, I would often, and I'm sure you do, get emails coming from a school district that have been compromised, trying to compromise my school district and get them to click on a link. Can we take the 2 minutes to call the IT director for that district and say, hey, I think you may have an account compromised because I'm getting 500 emails from this specific account trying to contact us, right? So just those moments of collaboration.
Yeah, Michael, I was at Wisconsin Weedle, it's the state chapter of COSIN in Wisconsin, meeting a couple Decembers ago. And we actually had a reenactment along with the fake phones, right? About this is what calling your CISA looks like. Jen Lotze, who is a leader on the other side of the state, had experienced a compromise. And so she talked about that. Okay, this is the number I called. Everyone in the audience, put this number in your phone right now because you're going to call that first. And then on the other end of the phone was someone from the state cyber response team. And so they just kind of walked through what are some steps that we need to do here. And they somewhat demystified it, right? So that it's not a scary thing. And I tell you, that reenactment really made an impression on me because it's like, okay, we know this is going to happen sometime, and this is what it could look like. And it's not alarming or things like that. We just calmly pick up the phone and we go through these steps. So those of you out there who have experienced this, the more you're able to share what you have experienced, I think will bring a sense of calm somewhat to your colleagues, because no one knows, what it's going to be like until it really happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great to hear that one of the one of the participants said they have an instant response plan that their insurance company helped them draft, which is great. I mean, I know that insurance can sometimes be a very challenging process, but for me, it was a helpful forcing function, right? It was a conversation where we won't be able to be insured if we don't do X, Y, Z. Then you can talk to your superintendent about that. So I think that's really helpful to know. And then free action to take. So on a different part of the kind of protecting side. So if you don't have something already that does malicious domain blocking and reporting, MSISAC, the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center, which is funded by the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, has a free program with CISA and Akamai that basically does cloud-based recursive DNS to block kind of outgoing bad traffic, right? And so this is totally free and something that can block a lot of ransomware infections just by preventing the initial outreach to the delivery domain. And it takes about 15 minutes to set up and has basically no maintenance associated with it. In the chat, if folks want to let us know, do you have something already where you're doing kind of DNS security like this? If not, have you tried MDBR? One other thing I'll mention that I think was one of the highlights of the vendor commitments was that we saw, oh my goodness, Cloudflare say that they would make their DNS and email security services available to any district who has fewer than 2,500 students for free. And so that's one of those things that I think is important to note as well, is that vendors are starting to make commitments as well, not just the nonprofit and federal sector. Oh, awesome. Sounds like Nate had a really easy time setting up that service. That is excellent to hear.
And I really do like the information that MSISAC puts out, you know, whenever there's something going on. I feel informed that way. If I read down later in their messages, it gets way too technical for me. But
yeah.
I do love that, you know, you get the information right away. And that's so helpful.
Absolutely. I'm going to go to detect next, and I want to leave some time at the end for everyone to just ask questions. I mean, maybe we can unmute people or figure out a way to get their awesome questions in there. In terms of, wait, did I do that already? Okay, yeah, detect example. So Connecticut has a great approach to no-cost cybersecurity services. You may have something similar in your state. When I was in Connecticut, we got all of our internet through the Connecticut Education Network, which was our REN, our research education network in the state. And in addition to providing internet, they provided us several other services at no cost, which was incredibly helpful, especially during the pandemic as we were transitioning. We had an influx of devices. All those devices were going home that had never been home before. And so we had all of these new challenges. And so DDoS mitigation was one of the most helpful for me, right? Like we would see reports back from CEN that there were days when, you know, something was trying to take down our network. Sometimes it's an internal threat, like students that really don't want to take a test on a certain day. So we do see DDoS attacks that happen on testing days. But oftentimes you have external parties that are also trying to take down networks and stop students from being able to do their work and stop districts from doing their work. We also had inline filtering for all of our districts and libraries related to SIPA because of the E-rate requirements, and then also a DNS firewall. So those kinds of add-on services that could be for cost are actually supported for free kind of within the state. And so I don't know if there are any other states doing similar work, but we kind of hold these up in the guide as examples of things that states can do to provide greater support and greater capacity that an individual district might not be able to do. And then to Diane's point from before, you should 100% join. Well, I'm not allowed to make any requirements or anything like that, and I'm not allowed to endorse anything. So this isn't an endorsement, but I would say if you can only do one thing related to detection, join MSISAC. It is funded by CISA, as we've talked about. It's free for all state, tribal, local, and territorial entities, including school districts. You get access to a whole bunch of different services, vulnerability assessments, incident response support, and a lot of other great things, including many emails about threats that you'll see in your environment. And as Diane said, sometimes you just skim the top of it, you're good. If you're really nerdy like me and you want to get down into those like TTPs, those tactics, techniques, and procedures and specific, you know, indicators of compromise to block, you can get down into that level too. But you can join them for free, and it's definitely worth doing. So yeah, join MSISAC. Any MSISAC fans out there? Oh, Brad, thank you for putting this in chat. Brad said in Indiana, if schools and local government sign up for an in.gov domain, they get a ton of protection for their domain, including DDoS mitigation, malicious traffic protection, geolocation protection, bot protection. That's really, really great to hear, Brad. And something that I really hope that other states are taking on as well. I wonder, is that because you're in the .gov domain space? So actually anyone who's in the .gov would get that, not just state by state. I think that might be the case because I know that CISA took over the .gov space I think 5 or 6 years ago and has done a big push for at least our local municipalities and their elections officials to get .gov domains to make the elections more secure, but it's something that school districts could be doing as well. Any other thoughts or questions on detection? I'm an ex-teacher, so I give lots of wait time, but I'm going to keep going. Anyone can get a free .gov, especially those specific services are in Indiana. Okay, cool. That's super helpful to know. Thank you, Brad. Okay, response. North Carolina has a really cool thing that they're doing across their whole state. And it combines 3 really important elements that I think they've done very elegantly. So they have a state information sharing network. They have a mandatory incident response law, incident reporting law for any public entity, including school district that experiences any kind of cyber incident. And it's not punitive, but provides real-time incident response support to those people who actually bring up the challenge that they're facing. And so this is from January 2021. That joint cyber task force includes federal partners like the FBI, National Guard for the state, as well as school district and state agency personnel. And probably most importantly, the task force has been authorized by the governor and the legislature to mobilize the National Guard and deploy a strike force without any further action. So they don't need anybody to do anything other than know that an incident has been reported, and they can literally put boots on the ground to support the school districts that have been affected within hours. And so it's a really powerful model that brings together that federal level of intelligence from the FBI. It brings together that state level knowledge of the National Guard, who has great cyber resources in many states, and also the subject matter expertise of the state education agency, as well as the local education agencies who are able to get kind of training and support, as well as that incident response work. It's one of the most elegant examples I've seen of ways to mobilize a whole state around these kind of 3 elements, kind of a virtuous circle of, we have an incident report, we have information sharing, we have the infrastructure for that, and then we have the ability to respond immediately to those challenges. I don't know if anyone else wants to share similar examples or anything like that, but this was one of those things where I heard about it, I was like, huh, that is a really, really interesting way of bringing together all of those different levels of government to make that all work beautifully. And in the chat, it says, is there any feeling if CIRCIA will be applicable to school districts? CIRCIA, yeah, great question. So Tim, we have spoken with CISA, who is the agency that has been tasked with implementing CIRCIA, which is the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act. Because education facilities subsector is a critical infrastructure subsector, some component will likely be involved in the legislation and the implementation. 2 things to note: that process probably won't be done until 2025. So it's still very early in the process. They'll put out like a notice for comment, I think in the next 6 months or year. So districts can weigh in and share their thoughts about that. And I know that one of the things that they've really been focused on is making sure that it's not burdensome to actually report, and that there will be and it's in the legislation actually, it is not punitive and it is not public, right? So this is, incidents will be reported to CISA, kept internal to CISA for the purposes of collecting and understanding the threat, as opposed to any kind of punitive measure. So it's similar to like a safe harbor provision. Cool. I'm going to keep going. Respond, get to know your local points of contact, FBI and CISA. They're wonderful. CISA has been really growing their cybersecurity advisors across the country. I believe they have 56 at this point, or last time I checked with them. And I have links to find your CISA regional office as well as your local FBI field office in case you don't know who those folks are, because they're really the most important people for you to be in touch with when you have one of those incidents. And one of the big things that we've been pushing across the federal government is no matter who you go to, you're going to get to the right place. So if you go to CISA, CISA will loop in FBI. If you go to FBI, FBI will loop in CISA and the Department of Education. So we'll all be able to support there. And then the last section, which is recover. Oh, sorry, Diane, you want to jump in?
I just wanted to bring up that I was at an MS-ISAC conference. This was quite a few years ago. And it seems that since that point until now, there has been much more federal attention on the education institutions, right? Institutes of higher ed, I think, had always had, that kind of support, but K-12, not so much. In fact, I was like one of the only education people there at that conference. And, the focus was on city government and small village, government and things like that, which is great. But K-12 really was not on the radar. And so again, as you're talking about now mobilizing federal knowledge to support K-12, I can say that we've come a long way. And so I'm grateful for that. That may have been like in 2015, 2016. So within those years, there's incredible, and I'm sure part of it is because schools have been discovered, right, by bad actors. But to mobilize all these really knowledgeable and powerful resources for K-12 really does make a difference here. So I just, in reflection, I'm grateful to see that evolution.
I'm so glad to hear that. And it's thanks largely to you, to COSN membership, to people who have been really pushing these topics forward over and over again over time. Because I think that this is something that, again, and unfortunately at the federal level, unless there is authorizing language, right, unless there are laws or budget for a particular topic, then it's unlikely that an agency will be deeply involved in it, right? And so while higher education does have some requirements because they function like banks, right? Because they're student loans and they go back and forth, they have financial information. There are certain laws that require them to do things differently. We in K-12 have not really had a sectoral law addressing cybersecurity. And so now I'm glad that we're in a place where even if there's no law forcing us to do these things, we have enough kind of coherence around what the approach should look like that everybody is moving in the same direction anyway to kind of get there in a voluntary way, which is really great. And the last thing I'll add on the recover side is performing and testing backups. Again, this stuff is not new to anybody. This is really just a way to highlight for those many people who have so many things going on, the most important things that they could be doing, and just to highlight some examples, right? So being able to restore critical digital infrastructure from backups has helped school districts avoid disruption and protected them from having to pay ransoms in some contexts, right? 2 examples, Athens Independent School District in Texas was hit with ransomware in July 2020. They restored their most important database, including student records from redundant backups, and avoided paying the ransom that way, which was great. And then Wilkes-Barre Korean Technical Center in Pennsylvania was hit in March 2020 with a payroll server, and they were able to make payroll after restoring from backup from secure cloud storage. So again, we have these challenges that people are facing, and through just good basic hygiene practices and good, basic IT and cyber practices, able to get back up and running. I will say the challenges that we're facing on the ransomware side, right? Ransomware used to just be an availability attack, right? Like we're going to try to shut off your access to the network, encrypt all your systems. Then we saw the double ransom, right? We saw the shutting down your systems, encrypting your stuff, and also stealing all the data. And now what we're seeing is many actually threat actors are not even spending the time to encrypt the network. They're just getting in there, stealing the data, and then posting on a dark web forum that, hey, we have this district's information, we will post it in this many days if we don't get the ransom. So not even taking the energy to actually shut down the networks anymore because that takes more time on their part. We've also seen dwell time go down. So there was just a study that showed that the amount of time that a threat actor is in a network has shrunk dramatically over the course of several years. Even just in the last year, it's gone from 9 days on average down to 5. So we're seeing like people hitting really, really quick times to be able to get in, get domain admin, take out the data they need, and basically either shut a district down or ransom them. And so having those backups is a really helpful way. And one of the challenges we face is that even if you have a backup, if you haven't been testing them, oftentimes they don't work. And so knowing how to restore from backup is actually a practice that we need to exercise, because there are many districts that have thought they were okay, but then when they actually get to the moment of needing that backup and needing to restore, no one actually knows the steps to take. I can't say that I would have known in my district exactly every single step that I needed to take if we hadn't actually walked through it. So yeah,
Really
and then, sorry, yeah.
Really good points, Michael. And you know, that part about having a place to put your stuff as a backup here in Wisconsin, we've had school district IT directors kind of collaborate with each other. And, you know, maybe a school district across the state can act as a disaster recovery site.
Yep, that's
And
a great
so just
idea.
helping those leaders collaborate and build those connections just makes everybody stronger. And that's why, you know, an organization like COSIN, where these conversations can take place, and also to get the problems voiced to you all over, you know, at the federal level, I think is so important.
Absolutely. And I want to use Matt's comment about tabletop exercises and the value that they serve to transition into my very last thing, which is my bonus high impact free action to take, which is run a tabletop exercise with your district leadership team. It's one of CISA's cybersecurity performance goals. It aligns to all of those things. And there's probably not a better use of 60 to 90 minutes that you're going to get than sitting with your leadership team and helping them understand not a super technical experience, but here is a step-by-step process of what we're going to do, and here's what that attack looks like, and what would we do here. It builds that muscle memory, right? It makes the infrastructure visible. Because a lot of times our challenge is that when infrastructure is working well, nobody notices it. We only notice the sewers when they back up. We only notice the internet when it goes down. And so how do we make those structures visible to people before an emergency happens, so that we can build in the resilience that we want and make sure that they're as defensible as possible? And there are specifically some really great K-12 tabletop exercises. CISA has one specifically around a threat actor targeting employees through phishing emails, which then leads to ransomware that compromises the network, impacts the exfiltration of student data with PII, loss of the HVAC system, media inquiries is a really good one, like, and awesome and great for a superintendent to think about, how do I respond to the media, while the IT people are thinking about, how do we actually recover? And then one of our technical assistance centers at ED, REMS TA, has a tabletop exercise that looks at what the school's emergency response planning team has, and then actually practices like, what would you do in the event of a data breach because of malware with your actual systems. There's some really great resources out there that are not going to take you forever and a day. They're really something that you can run through with your team in a matter of a couple of hours. And that's the end. I have time for questions, and this has just been an awesome opportunity to chat with everybody. And yeah, I just want to leave the time open for Diane to ask any questions or anything to get in the chat.
By looking at the chat, I have seen, you know, people highly valuing tabletop exercises. And just like you talked about with the muscle memory, fighter drill like, you know, the word tabletop should not be a new word to people,
Right.
because, you know, this is something that should take place. So yes, thank you for naming off, Michael, some of the places where people can go to get school-related tabletop exercises. I think that's always helpful to have those pre-made already, so you're not, you know, trying to reinvent the wheel.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Matthew says, it's daunting at first, but develop the strategy and it is really worth it in the event of something happening. So being prepared.
Yep. I will take Greg's question the best I can. So any updates on E-rate supporting cybersecurity expenditures? So my understanding, Greg, at least as of this point, and you can definitely check the White House event, which did have a senior person from FCC talking about the new program, is that the cybersecurity funding that they're proposing, which would be $200 million over 3 years, is intended as a pilot program and is pulled from funds outside of E-rate, but still part of the broader kind of programs that support the same entities that E-rate supports. And so that would be to basically allow people to test out what is efficacious in these various places, what kinds of cybersecurity controls are people looking for, how much do they cost, what kind of impact are they having, and then have that be a way to kind of understand the need and impact of those kinds of cybersecurity expenditures. But I don't work for the FCC, so I don't know beyond that exactly the specifics. I do believe they're going to be putting out something for public comment pretty soon about what the structure of that program would look like. But as someone who ran school district IT, am very excited that there is going to be some dedicated funding for cybersecurity. And who knows what it'll end up looking like, whether it's, another category in E-rate or whether it's a separate program or all those different pieces of it, I don't know. But it's exciting that the advocacy of organizations like COSN and individuals in IT staff and others have been able to kind of bring this issue up and hopefully bring some resourcing to the table.
Michael, really good point. I recall when I was in Green Bay, I said, gosh, school districts know what they need. They know they are the boots on the ground. So why couldn't we allow school districts to be innovative and allow them some wiggle room so that they can forge a new way? That's how we're going to get innovation. And so as a person who serves on the COSN Policy Committee, we supported this. And I'm really excited to see what this might bring forward as opportunity for additional funding, an E-rate for cybersecurity.
Awesome. Any other questions for me or ideas? I'm happy to bring any ideas back. We really hope to be a service organization that advocates and actually brings the concerns of districts and states to the federal level.
Well, Michael, I really appreciate the way you boiled down, a lot of the high points from your report. And let's see, I want to get it up on my screen again so you all could see it. Defensible and resilient right here. And so I like the way you talked about, 3 simple things you can do to that would take care of 80 to 90% of the cybersecurity issues. And so really it's like the dashboard, people. If you are interested, go to this link and find out more about it. We very much appreciate your time, Michael, and coming to join us, talking about examples that you've seen and giving, real live stories and life to what's been going on out there. We're so grateful for the move forward and look forward to what's going to be coming next because of it. So thank you
Awesome.
for your time and your expertise. And I can tell by the people who are chatting in the comment section that they're very happy that you're here as well. Thank you, audience. Very good questions. And we're so glad that you joined us.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.